You don't belong here. Get out.
Andrew, with his prestigious education and placement in the sales department, and me, a graduate of a third-rate college assigned to the human resources department. It's no wonder Andrew looks down on me. Usually, I would endure Andrew's remarks, but this time my dad was beside me. I never wanted to worry my dad. I hated feeling so powerless. Then my dad shouted,
Bring me the highest ranking person here right now.
"My name is Michael Smith, and I'm 23 years old this year. I've lived with my father, David, ever since I was a child. My dad works as a construction manager at a construction company, and his income is fairly average. We never struggled, but we couldn't afford luxuries. My mother passed away from illness when I was very young. But my father worked hard to make sure I never felt lonely. He'd wake up early every day to make me a lunchbox. It didn't look great, but it was made with love. During school events, he would leave work to attend. While other parents wore suits and fancy clothes, my dad showed up in his work uniform. I felt embarrassed as everyone stared at my out-of-place dad, but I was happy that he came to the school event. Still, I sometimes felt lonely without a mother, so I'd stay out late with friends. Looking back, I was probably relying too much on my dad. But he'd wait at the door without sleeping until I got home. And when I did, he'd always greet me with a smile. Even though he must have been exhausted from work, my dad always put me first. Gradually, I started to feel guilty about that and began coming straight home after school. Seeing this change in me, my dad would smile. More than 20 years have passed living with my dad, and I've grown up. To save on commuting costs, I went to a nearby college. It's considered a third-rate school, nothing to brag about. But it's a private college with scholarships and tuition waivers for honors students, making it easier for me to attend without burdening my dad. I spent my free time working part-time jobs and eventually graduated and got a job at Rainbow Corporation. I was the first from my college to get an offer from this company. Rainbow Corporation is a popular company with many applicants. Usually, only graduates from well-known universities get in. As a result, even my college professors were surprised. I've caused my dad financial hardships, but now I can support him financially. I felt proud that I could finally do something for my dad. But my expectations were dashed as soon as I joined the company. On the day of the orientation, I met the last person I wanted to see. As soon as he saw me, he walked over with a smirk.
Well, look who's here. You, loser Michael. I didn't think someone like you could get a job.
"Andrew, you're at this company too?" I muttered softly. Andrew stepped closer and whispered in my ear so no one else could hear.
This company isn't right for you. You're an eyesore, and I'll crush you soon.
I frowned at Andrew's words. Andrew was my classmate in senior year of high school. He was always picking on me and was a terrible person. I think he looked down on me because I was from a single-parent household.
You're at the bottom of society without both parents. Everyone. If you don't want to end up like Michael, stay away from him.
Andrew would shout such terrible things to our classmates. Back then, Andrew was good-looking and had the best grades in the class. He was popular with both boys and girls, so when he said that, my classmates distanced themselves from me. Because of that, I spent my last year of high school alone. I was frustrated, but there was nothing I could do and had to give up. As I was remembering those things, the assignments for each department were announced. Andrew was placed in the prestigious sales department. I was assigned to the mundane human resources department. As soon as the assignments were made, Andrew looked down on me.
Even your assignment is for losers. Starting in human resources department, such a dead-end job, how sad.
Andrew laughed at me and walked away. My first major task in the Human Resources Department was to prepare for the company's social event. Of course, I wasn't doing it alone. The entire Human Resources Department worked together. Our company holds a social event every October. It avoids the fiscal year end and busy periods, and it's also about 6 months after the new employees join, so they're well integrated into the company by then. Our social event is a big deal every year. Not only do the president and board members attend, but employees' families are also welcome to join. Because it's such a large event, detailed preparations for the schedule and food arrangements were underway. The burden of these preparations fell heavily on us in the Human Resources Department. We had to work overtime every day, and I was feeling mentally exhausted. My colleagues also looked worn out. In addition to our regular duties like payroll, we had to prepare for the social event. It's no wonder everyone was losing their patience. That day, I was scheduled for overtime again, so I went to the break room to buy a coffee. There, I happened to run into Andrew. The moment I saw him, I felt disheartened. I knew he would definitely put me down. And sure enough, my prediction was correct. When Andrew saw me with a coffee in hand, he snorted.
You're working overtime again? In such a dull, slow-paced department, you really must be terrible at your job.
I retorted to Andrew's words. We're just busy with preparations for the social event right now. Besides, could you stop belittling not just me, but my entire department? Andrew smirked and said,
You, the company's burden, dare to lecture me? You've got some nerve.
You don't even know how hard I work. Andrew's presumptuous remarks made me want to sigh. Then, in the next moment, Andrew did something unbelievable. Andrew turned the cup of coffee he was drinking upside down right in front of me. After that, he dropped the cup and stepped on it. With a triumphant smile, he spoke to me.
Make sure you clean this up, will you, support staff?
Andrew laughed as he left the break room. It was truly unacceptable behavior. I had no choice but to grit my teeth and clean up. With only a week left until the social event, I was troubled. Since then, Andrew has been harassing me at every opportunity. I've been enduring it, not wanting to end up like in high school, but I wasn't sure if this was the right thing to do. However, I didn't have the courage to stand up to Andrew, who seemed to be on the elite track in the sales department. If others found out, I might end up isolated again. As a new employee, if I'm avoided by my colleagues, it would impact my future work. I couldn't find an answer to whether I should keep enduring Andrew's behavior or stand up to him. All I could do was worry and hold my head in my hands. Seeing me in such a state, my dad reached out to me.
Michael, are you okay? You seem troubled about something.
Dad. My dad always noticed when I was feeling down. I appreciated his kindness. But now that I'm an adult, I couldn't rely on him too much. So I smiled and replied, "It's nothing. Work is going well, so don't worry."
As long as you're not pushing yourself too hard.
But my dad still looked concerned. I didn't want to worry him any further, so I decided to change the subject. "Oh, by the way, why don't you come to my company's social event as my guest?"
Social event?
My dad looked surprised. I explained that I was part of the human resources team organizing the event and that family members were welcome to attend. After hearing this, my dad agreed to come.
I'd love to see how you're doing at Rainbow Corporation. I'll be there.
I was thrilled by his response. "Really? Thanks, Dad." Knowing that my dad would see how hard I was working would surely put his mind at ease. I put even more effort into preparing for the social event to make sure my dad would have a great time. On the day of the social event, I attended with my dad. Although the preparations were tough, I didn't have any responsibilities during the event so that all employees could enjoy it. The event was held on a weekday, but my dad took the day off work to join me. I was touched by his kindness.
Are you Michael's father? Michael has been working so hard and has been a great help to me.
John, the human resources manager, came over and showered me with praise. I felt embarrassed by all the praise from John. My dad looked happy to hear me being complimented.
I'm so proud of my son Michael for doing such a great job.
I felt happy, but then I sensed a hostile gaze. When I looked in that direction, I saw Andrew glaring at me. John and my dad didn't seem to notice Andrew's stare.
Well, enjoy the event, David.
After a while, John moved on to talk with other employees.
You've joined a good company.
My dad looked at me and spoke with deep emotion. I felt proud of myself seeing my dad so content, but then an unexpected interruption occurred. Andrew, who had been watching us from a distance, approached with a beer in hand. I was hoping that my bad feeling would be wrong, but Andrew said exactly what I feared.
Well, look who's here. You, a failure from Human Resources Department.
Michael, who is this?
My dad frowned at Andrew's harsh words. But Andrew didn't care and continued speaking to my dad.
I'm Andrew, assigned to the prestigious sales department. I went to the same high school as Michael, but unlike him, I'm actually successful.
I couldn't help but glare at Andrew. His words were completely inappropriate for such a festive occasion. However, Andrew seemed oblivious and kept trying to assert his dominance over me.
You come from a single-parent household, right? Poor people like you guys will always be stuck at the bottom, even in a top company. Your dad looks shabby and doesn't belong here.
I couldn't let Andrew's outrageous comments slide and spoke up. "Andrew, have you had too much to drink? How dare you speak to my father like that?" I didn't want anyone to speak to my beloved dad that way, so I confronted Andrew. Then Andrew turned to me and made an even more shocking remark.
Don't you get it? You don't belong here. Get out.
I was stunned by Andrew's cruel words. Andrew, with his prestigious education and placement in the sales department, and me, a graduate of a third-rate college assigned to the human resources department. It's no wonder Andrew looks down on me. However, his comments are utterly unacceptable. This time, he wasn't just insulting me, he was also insulting my dad. My dad's face turned red with anger, proving just how offensive Andrew's words were.
Who is this guy?
My dad muttered quietly. Seeing my dad's expression, I looked down and thought. Usually, I would endure Andrew's remarks, but this time my dad was right beside me. Thinking about how Andrew insulted my dad because of me made me regret my past behavior. Seeing that I remained silent, Andrew got even more heated.
The exit for poor folks like you is over there. Get out.
Andrew pointed to the exit. Moreover, it was just like Andrew to say such rude words in a low voice, making sure only we could hear them. Andrew wore a charming smile, so no one else noticed our exchange. Everyone else was chatting and having a good time. I clenched my fists tightly. It was infuriating to hear Andrew say whatever he wanted. I couldn't forgive him for insulting my respected father like this. Enough already. I finally yelled at Andrew. My voice trembled with anger. I never wanted to worry my dad. I hated feeling so powerless. Remembering how I was alone in high school, I had let Andrew have his way. But Andrew didn't seem to care about what I said at all.
What? I can't hear you. Poor people like you shouldn't be at a prestigious company's event. Just disappear right now.
Andrew laughed triumphantly at me. He probably believed that no matter how disrespectful he was to me, there would be no consequences. I was filled with nothing but anger toward him. I don't mind even if I get fired. I'm going to put Andrew in his place. With that thought, I stepped forward to confront him.
Got any complaints?
Andrew just kept smirking. But as I stepped forward, my dad blocked my way. Dad? I was puzzled, not understanding my dad's actions. Then my dad smiled warmly at me.
Michael, you don't need to push yourself anymore. You've done enough. Let me handle this. I won't let Andrew have his way any longer.
Andrew laughed at our exchange.
Is this some display of fatherly love? Poor people sure know how to act tough.
I glared intensely at Andrew. Then I started to worry if my dad was really okay. Andrew had both parents, unlike me with my single dad. So, he was probably in a much more privileged position than I was. I was worried if my single father could really stand up to someone like Andrew. Then, my dad shouted loudly enough for everyone around to hear.
Bring me the highest ranking person here right now.
What? Dad? I was shocked by my dad's unexpected demand. I thought he would confront Andrew directly. What is he planning by calling for a highest-ranking person? I was bewildered. The highest-ranking person in our company is the president, Robert, but I didn't understand why my dad was calling him. Apparently, Andrew felt the same way.
The highest ranking person? Old man, do you understand your position? Calling Robert just because you're Michael's father is only going to make things worse for Michael.
Andrew sneered. It's true that no parent would call the president over a dispute between new employees. Besides, I doubted that Robert would respond to my dad's summons. And as Andrew said, calling Robert might negatively affect me as well. Worried about my future, I tried to talk to my dad. Dad, it's okay now. This is my problem, and calling Robert isn't the right thing to do. I gently tried to persuade him, but he wouldn't listen.
Michael, you've had a hard time, haven't you? We need to call Robert and set things straight. Otherwise, your work is only going to get tougher.
My dad looked at me with concern. Andrew was watching our exchange with a look of disbelief.
Causing this kind of trouble is only going to make Michael's position worse. I wonder if he'll just get demoted? What's lower than the Human Resources Department?
Andrew smirked and muttered happily. He was probably enjoying imagining my downfall. He was truly a despicable man. However, there was some truth in Andrew's words, and I felt anxious. Dad, it's really okay. Let's not call Robert. I tried to persuade him, but he wasn't budging.
It's fine. Michael, just stand your ground.
My dad said with such confidence that I couldn't argue. I guess it's useless to say anything to him in this state. All right, Dad. I gave up and waited for Robert and the board members to arrive. 5 minutes later, they showed up. This is the end of my career. I resigned myself to my fate. But then something unexpected happened. What? I noticed that Robert and the board members looked uneasy, which puzzled me. But there was no time to dwell on that, because as soon as my dad saw them, he started yelling.
What is the meaning of this? This guy has been insulting my son Michael repeatedly. How are you going to take responsibility for this?
Dad, calm down. I turned pale at my dad's outburst. Standing in front of us were the company's president and board members. They were not people he should yell at, especially not as the family of an employee. I worried that I might not be able to stay at this company and buried my head in my hands.
Why are Robert and the board members here? This is just an argument between employees. There's no reason for them to get involved.
Andrew was shocked to see them show up, his face stiffening. But I couldn't worry about Andrew. Thinking about the future, I was drenched in sweat. I had worked hard to get into this company, and now there was a possibility I might have to leave after only 6 months. Imagining the grim future of being fired over this incident, I buried my head in my hands again. But then, something completely unexpected happened.
David, we deeply apologize for this incident.
Sweat was dripping from Robert's forehead, and he looked pale. One after another, the board members also started apologizing to my dad. They all looked distressed and desperate. What's going on? I couldn't help but speak out at this unbelievable sight.
What?
Andrew was visibly shaken as well. It's unheard of for the president to apologize to an employee's parent over an argument between employees. And it wasn't just the president, Robert, but the other board members as well. They were all desperately apologizing to my dad, seeking his forgiveness. Andrew was utterly baffled by the situation, holding his head in disbelief.
Why are they apologizing? Normally, they would just brush off a regular employee's parent.
Andrew likely didn't expect things to escalate this far. He's always been the type to hurl insults at me quietly. This situation was probably beyond his expectations as well. Despite the situation, my dad remained furious, shouting at Robert.
This is because your employee training is inadequate. Hiring someone like Andrew was a mistake in the first place.
My dad listed Andrew's faults, scolding Robert and the board members.
Stop it. This will affect my evaluation.
Andrew's anger was evident as he looked at my dad. My dad kept mentioning Andrew's name, so if this continued, Andrew would definitely be dragged down with me. Andrew realized this and glared at my dad. There was no sign of remorse in Andrew's expression. He probably didn't think he was at fault at all. Then Robert, trembling, said,
David, you're absolutely right. We sincerely apologize.
The board members also repeatedly apologized to my dad. What is going on here? I could only mutter those words, stunned by the scene unfolding before me. I had thought that they would just give a light apology and that would be the end of it. But the reality was entirely different. Robert began apologizing, and the board members were showing great deference to my dad. When I looked at Andrew, he was pale.
Maybe this is the end for me. I just wanted to get Michael fired. How did it come to this?
Andrew's words clearly showed regret for his actions. Looking around, the other employees were also in shock. When my dad shouted earlier, there was a bit of a stir, but no one expected Robert and the board members to apologize to him. Maybe, like me, they thought it would end with a light apology. But in reality, they were all apologizing, turning the event into a scene from hell. When I glanced at John, he was frozen, still holding his glass. Everyone in Human Resources Department was staring at us with their mouths open. Some were in shock, while others were visibly upset. The social event was essentially over. Everyone's attention was on us. We couldn't let this important social event end in chaos. It was necessary to resolve this situation quickly. I asked my dad, who was scolding Robert and the board members, "Dad, how can you talk to Robert like that? It's too much, even if you're just an employee's family member." I tried to subtly calm my dad down, but his response was completely unexpected. He turned to me with a big smile and said,
Oh, I'm the largest shareholder of this company. I have the right to speak about the company's affairs.
"What? What do you mean?" I was shocked to learn this unexpected fact. I never imagined that I would learn such a fact, having always thought we were just an ordinary family. Andrew was equally surprised.
What? How can a loser's father be a major shareholder in a big company like this? That's impossible.
Andrew's disbelief was evident in his voice. I could understand his point. Typically, shareholders in a major company like Rainbow Corporation would be CEOs of similar companies or successful investors with considerable status and prestige. But my dad was just a regular employee, and we were a single-parent family. We certainly weren't wealthy. I had never experienced luxury growing up, and my dad hadn't either. So I doubted my dad's statement. I thought maybe my dad had invested a small amount in Rainbow Corporation, but that alone wouldn't make them apologize. What's going on? I was utterly confused. Seeing my confusion, my dad began to explain the truth.
It wasn't me who originally became a shareholder. It was my great-grandfather. I just inherited a large amount of his shares.
My dad said this with a smile. It turned out that his great-grandfather was a very influential landowner in our hometown and quite wealthy. He saw the potential in our company when it was still small and decided to invest heavily. At that time, it was easy to acquire shares in Rainbow Corporation, and his great-grandfather quickly became the largest shareholder. By the time it was my dad's turn, his great-grandfather's assets had been divided among his siblings, leaving my dad with a modest inheritance. However, my dad inherited all the company's shares as per his great-grandfather's will. In return, the savings and land were inherited by the other siblings. My dad inherited only the shares because that was his great-grandfather's wish. There were so many shares that my dad couldn't inherit anything else. Rainbow Corporation is a large company, and it made sense that the value of the shares would be too much for one person to inherit. I asked my dad about something that puzzled me. Then why didn't you sell the shares? Even selling half of them would have meant you didn't have to work. Selling Rainbow Corporation shares would have greatly improved our lifestyle. We could have easily gotten several $1,000,000. But my dad didn't sell them. He smiled and said,
Sure, selling them might have made us rich, but living a life of leisure and spending money isn't for me. Besides, there are people at my current job who need me.
but I still wasn't satisfied with his answer, so he continued,
Also, there's another reason why the shares can't be sold.
What? My dad explained that it was related to his great-grandfather's will. In the will, his great-grandfather stated, the shares of Rainbow Corporation must be preserved and passed down through the generations. He didn't want the shares to be sold, he wanted them to be inherited. That's why my dad inherited all the shares without any complaints from his siblings. His great-grandfather was wise and understood that selling a large number of shares could cause turmoil in the company. Normally, many people would sell shares quickly if there was a chance for a big profit. I realized how thoughtful his great-grandfather had been. He was a good man. I murmured softly. My dad smiled at my comment. Seeing that I understood, he turned back to Robert and started pressing him again about Andrew.
So, what are you going to do about this? Allowing someone who looks down on others to run free. Michael is the heir to my shares.
My dad spoke in a deliberately low voice to make sure Robert understood. My dad's statement made Robert turn pale as he looked at me. Seeing Robert like that, I felt utterly confused. I was equally shocked, having never considered myself the future principal shareholder of the company I worked for. The social event hall fell silent. Everyone was quietly watching the situation unfold. After a moment, Robert finally spoke.
I wasn't aware of Michael's background since he was hired through general recruitment. I deeply apologize for this situation.
Robert's face was beyond pale, turning almost white. If my dad decided to sell all his shares, it would be disastrous. Recovering those shares could require a massive investment. Faced with such risks, Robert was clearly feeling the pressure. However, Robert wasn't the only one in a difficult position. My dad glared sharply at Andrew. Andrew was visibly frightened by my dad's glare. My dad was now someone even Robert feared. It was no surprise that Andrew, just an employee, was intimidated. Then my dad gave Andrew a final ultimatum.
This company doesn't need someone like you who tries to undermine others. I will call an emergency shareholders meeting to discuss your fate.
My dad pointed sternly at Andrew. Everyone turned to look at Andrew.
What? Am I getting fired from Rainbow Corporation?
Andrew was shaken by my dad's unexpected statement. He probably never thought he would be fired. Andrew's face turned pale, and I felt a sense of satisfaction. In response to Andrew's murmuring, my dad declared,
It's only natural to get rid of unnecessary employees. We'll decide your fate here, but you can leave now. You're no longer needed.
My dad made a dismissive gesture towards Andrew. Hearing this, Andrew looked like he was about to cry. Then he quickly turned to me.
Michael, please. We've been friends since high school, right? Help me out. I just got into this company, and I don't want to leave now.
Andrew, almost in tears, pleaded with me. I frowned at his words. After all the harassment he put me through, this is too convenient. I pushed Andrew away. Absolutely not. You always try to dominate by bullying the weak. Someone like you doesn't belong at Rainbow Corporation.
What?
Andrew was shocked, clearly not expecting me to talk back. He probably thought that begging would make me help him. But I wasn't that forgiving. I deliberately repeated the words Andrew had said to me earlier. You don't belong here. Get out. For some reason, the room erupted in applause. My dad was clapping, and so were Robert and the board members. And, strangely enough, even John and everyone from Human Resources Department were clapping for me. In this situation, Andrew's position became even more untenable.
You'll regret saying that to me.
Andrew shouted as he left the room. When I looked at Andrew one last time, he was clearly crying. He's just a sore loser. After all that arrogance, he ends up in tears. Andrew is really not manly at all. Many employees looked at the exit where Andrew had left and gave a wry smile, likely thinking the same thing. At that moment, I wasn't afraid of Andrew anymore.
He left like a coward in the end.
My dad spoke to me with a look of exasperation. I looked at my dad and smiled. In the end, Andrew resigned voluntarily. It turned out that Andrew was disliked by everyone for his arrogance and lack of actual skills as a salesperson. Apparently, the head of the sales department had given him the lowest possible evaluation. Even when his superiors tried to teach him, Andrew would look down on them and refuse to listen. The reason for his attitude was that his superiors had graduated from universities with lower rankings than his. Despite being a newcomer who should have been learning, Andrew's behavior was atrocious. Even so, since he was a new employee, Andrew had never been strongly reprimanded by those around him. But after the social event, he was constantly criticized for not meeting his targets. His superiors scolded him relentlessly. Everyone around him kept giving him the cold shoulder. As a result, Andrew started feeling increasingly uncomfortable at work. Then, one day, he suddenly handed in his resignation and left the company as if he were fleeing. I had always thought Andrew was popular within the company, just like he was in high school. But it turns out that being an adult in the workforce is different from being a student. Later, I heard through the grapevine that Andrew had a hard time finding another job after leaving Rainbow Corporation. Andrew must have thought he would quickly find another job after leaving Rainbow Corporation. However, reality isn't that kind. Once he explains why he left, no company would want to hire him. For a company that Andrew would want to work for, it's unlikely they would hire him. Considering how much Andrew valued his education and work history, not being hired anywhere must be a huge blow to his pride. He's probably feeling quite humiliated right now. As for me, I continued working in the human resources department. At first, I was worried that people would distance themselves from me after finding out my dad was the largest shareholder in Rainbow Corporation. Even Robert had apologized to my dad, and everyone in the company knew about what happened at the social event. Even those who missed the event heard about it from others. For a while, I often noticed employees from other departments whispering and glancing at me from a distance. I remember feeling extremely uncomfortable. However, things at my department didn't change. Today, the human resources team was operating as usual.
Hurry up with the payroll calculations. We need to process the transfers tomorrow. If you can't finish by noon, Michael will have to perform a skit at next month's party.
John pushed me to work faster. His comment made my colleagues laugh, and they offered me their support. The human resources team didn't treat me any differently. I felt very comfortable with that. My dad also continued to work as a regular employee. He seemed to enjoy his job and had no plans to retire anytime soon. Despite the fact that he could live quite comfortably with the benefits from his shares, he declined them.
A luxurious life doesn't suit me. Working hard like this is what fits me.
My dad would say with a smile. I loved my unpretentious dad who works diligently. Someday, I would inherit the position of the largest shareholder in Rainbow Corporation from him. When that time comes, I might not be able to work the same way I do now. Even so, I looked forward to taking over from my dad and protecting Rainbow Corporation. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to keep looking up to my dad and do my best in what I can do now.